So, what exactly is a hero? Well, the Google definition says it's a person who's admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. Okay, so then what's a villain? Well, the Random House Unabridged dictionary defines a villain as a cruelly malicious person who is involved or devoted to wickedness or crime. Now, I'm just going to go with that one because they also use the word scoundrel in order to define what a villain is, and I think that's too hilarious to pass up. But there are a ton of different definitions by a bunch of different sources to the point where the two words to me have personally just lost all meaning. To me, it just seems a little bit archaic to put a binary equivalent to something that's just never been so black and white. I personally like characters who genuinely could just blur the line between those two worlds, and I think one character that does that pretty well is actually Spider-Man. But, not normal friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but the superior Spider-Man. Oh, and just in case you don't know who the superior Spider-Man is, then let me just take a second to catch you up. Oh, and also massive spoilers for issue 700 of Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man comic run, all the way up to the end of Superior Spider-Man run. So, if you just wanted to read any of those, then, just read that entire run or whatever. But if you don't care, then, let's just keep going with the video. In issue 700 of The Amazing Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus essentially finds out that he's dying because he's had so many beatings throughout his life from Spider-Man. But he has one final plan in order to cheat death. He found a way to steal Spider-Man's body. He essentially took Peter Parker's body, basically stealing his life, his family, his friends, and he took on all the responsibilities that comes with being Spider-Man, while Peter Parker was put into the body of Dr. Octopus, who was already this decrepit, dying, feeble body locked behind a cell with only hours to live. He goes on this entire adventure to try to get his body back, but because Marvel hates it when Spider-Man's happy, he fails, and Dr. Octopus just stands there and just watches him take his final breaths. And as he dies, his entire life flashes before his eyes, but that's something that he uses to his advantage. He forces Dr. Octopus to relive every single memory that Peter Parker has ever had, every fight, every tragedy, every single lesson, especially the one that was instilled to him by Uncle Ben. With great power comes great responsibility. Peter hopes that all these lessons will actually be taken to heart by Octavius, and he asks him to essentially carry on the mantle of being Spider-Man to protect his friends, his family, and, whoever else needs help. And surprisingly enough, Octavius actually accepts the position, and he wants to take the responsibility. And that essentially leaves Peter with no regrets as he dies. Now, this is actually one of the best ways that Spider-Man possibly could go out. And, well, I don't exactly mean just simply, him being killed and having his life stolen without being mourned by any of his friends or family. No, that part definitely sucks. I think the Ultimate Universe definitely did a little bit better with his death. But here, I think it's good simply because it's such an amazing way for him to die trying to make one of his most evil foes, one of his greatest enemies ever, and trying to help them learn what great power and responsibility really means. It's just so in character for him to try to help someone while dying, even if it seems like they don't deserve to be helped. He's trying to help them and teach them a lesson so that they can be good, so that the world doesn't need him. He's preparing the world for his own death, and I think that's pretty cool. Okay, but that was all basically just the backstory. Now we can actually get into the actual story and character of Superior Spider-Man. And essentially now he's Spider-Man now, and he has his memories and everything, so, he can be an adequate Spider-Man, but at the same time, he's so much different from the first Peter Parker. The first thing that makes this man so much different from Peter is the fact that he talks so much shit. And I understand that Peter Parker's always done that. But he always talks shit, mainly just to make jokes. Spider-Man makes jokes to throw off every single one of his opponents, just to throw them off their game so that they can act irrationally and he could win in the fight later. But Dr. Octopus talks shit because he specifically thinks that he's better than everyone. He's completely obsessed with the concept of him being superior, which is why he calls himself specifically Superior Spider-Man. Despite all that, he doesn't really seem to actually be able to back up any of his claims of being Superior Spider-Man. And that's mainly because of the fact that he's not able to endure the same things that Peter Parker had to endure. In the first issue, Speed Demon attacks Octavius with hundreds of blows in a fraction of a second, which is way more blows than Octavius has ever felt in his entire life.
He's never felt that much pain in his entire life, and he realizes that Peter Parker had to deal with this pain on a daily basis. And instead of thinking that, Peter might be admirable for being able to take that much pain, he immediately thinks that Peter is just insane, and Octavius just decides to dip. He just decides to leave the fight and just to fight another day, because he cannot even fathom how Peter Parker would deal with that much pain on a daily basis. But then, just as he's about to leave, he gets an explosive boomerang thrown at him, which isn't an actual problem for him because he has a spider sense, so he's able to dodge. But then, since it's a boomerang, its entire trajectory changes and it's about to hit a random cop. And even though, he didn't want to get hurt for anyone, he didn't want to take any more pain today, and he was just going to leave the crime scene regardless of what happened, he still decides to sacrifice his own body, and he puts himself in the way of the cop so that it explodes on his back instead of on the cop, and he saves his life, which confuses him because he, again, did not care. He did not want to take any more pain. He didn't want to suffer for anyone else. And this completely throws him off. But he then just brushes the entire feeling off because the villains get away and he wants to figure out a plan in order to stop them before their next heist. He also wants to have his own separate reputation from his predecessor, and I think he does a pretty good job of that because he's very different from Peter Parker. Now, this can usually either be a bad thing or a good thing, considering on the situation. I'm going to talk about the bad situations for a second, because in the bad times, he's usually just an asshole. He's a complete asshole to literally every single person he meets. He ignores Mary Jane for the entirety of the comic run, and the only times he doesn't ignore her is whenever he gets horny. That's a whole thing. Now that I think about it, it's probably the exact reason why J. Jonah Jameson actually likes Spider-Man in this comic, because they're both just such huge jerks, so they just turn into kindred spirits. The only people that he's actually nice to throughout this entire story is Anna Marie, which is his girlfriend at the time, and Aunt May, which used to be his girlfriend at one point when they almost got married that one time. So the only people that he's ever nice to, for the most part, are people that he's kinda just banged. Which is also probably the reason why he didn't get along with Mary Jane, because she didn't immediately put out. But there are some differences that are actually pretty good when you compare the two Spider-Men, that actually make him seem a little bit more superior. For starters, Octavius makes an entire habit of calling the police for backup, which is something that Peter has never done or even considered in his entire time of being Spider-Man. When he had his rematch against the new Sinister Six, he was able to put a blockade to completely stop them from escaping, which only took him about 9 seconds to do, by the way. Before the fight, he made sure to make the floors frictionless so that Speed Demon couldn't run on them. He made a power dampener so that none of the villains could use their tech, and he called the press minutes before the fight so that they could all see how badly he was going to beat down the Sinister Six. I was also half expecting him to pull a Mayuri Kuretsuchi and say that he replaced all of his vital organs 2 minutes before the fight. I genuinely really like this scene because of the fact that it really distinguishes him from Peter. He prepares in ways that Peter would have never even imagined, and has the guts to do the things that he would never do. Like when he finally breaks up with Mary Jane because he realizes just how dangerous everything is for her. And he does that despite how horny he is for her. There's also a moment in the side comics where he has to threaten a child in order to save the world, and I think it's pretty fun because he asks himself, how would Peter Parker save the world? But he realizes, no, he's not Peter Parker. He's Dr. Octavius. He's a superior Spider-Man. So he figures out his own way, and he threatens a kid and almost kills him in order to save the world, and it's actually a really funny moment. Despite all that, he still can't run away from the fact that he's literally in Peter Parker's body. All of his future scientific achievements will be known as Peter Parker's achievements. All of his good deeds will be known as Spider-Man's heroics. He even starts to use the same exact humor that Peter Parker used to use at times. And the only way that he can get past all this is simply just by becoming the superior Spider-Man in comparison to his predecessor. Octavius sees Peter as someone who never had a plan or any meaningful goals. He just drifted through life, and Otto refuses to be like that. He's a lot more efficient than Peter was. He's stopping more crimes, and more villains are too scared of fighting him because of the examples he's made of Boomerang and Vulture. And because he feels like he's better in that regard, he decided to only do what he feels like is his fair share of work. Like when there's a fire at MJ's nightclub, he simply just makes his Spirebots call the fire department because he thinks he's already done enough for the night. Far more than Peter would ever do in one night. And he'd rather go help May with her physical therapy, which seems good because he's balancing his life way better than Peter ever did. Oh, and when he finds out that Peter never got his doctorate, he gets so pissed and goes back to school to actually become a legitimate doctor, and then starts his own company called Parker Industries. Seriously, Dr. Octavius literally just has so much of his priorities straight. But I digress. So let's get back to the story.
Right at the climax of the battle with the new Sinister Six, Spider-Man starts to beat the ever-living crap out of Boomerang to the point where he's about to beat him to death, and the very thought of it is exhilarating. But before he can give the final blow, he stops. Again, he doesn't know why he stopped, just like he doesn't know why he put his own life on the line for some random guy. But his body seems to just do these things out of instinct. It's at this point that the audience is let in on a little bit of dramatic irony. Peter Parker's mind is still alive and is hiding in the back of Dr. Octavius' head, waiting and plotting for a way to get his body back. Peter stays in the back of Otto's mind for a good portion of the story, and I love how he mimics his every move, constantly shadowing him. Even when Otto gets into costume, Peter gets into costume and swings right alongside him. And while he fights, he's constantly telling him what to do, and Otto just interprets it as his consciousness. There's this one scene when Mary Jane's about to fall to her death, and Peter yells not to use the web to catch her because of his past experiences. And Otto instantly changes his mind and finds another way to try and save her. And I'm not entirely sure if it's because he hears Peter in the back of his mind, or if it's because he's smart enough to figure that out on his own. Another relatively controversial thing about this character is that he doesn't hold back and he doesn't take any shit from anyone. This moment is shown a lot when Superior Spider-Man meets Wolverine for the first time. Peter let Wolverine always badmouth and patronize him, but Doc Ock doesn't take any of that, and once Wolverine laid just one finger on him, he completely bodied him, showing him what it's like when Spider-Man doesn't hold back. And that difference made Wolverine immediately understand that whoever was under that mask wasn't the same Spider-Man he used to know. The brutality in him stems from the beatings he used to get as a kid. One time some bullies broke his glasses, and when his father found out, he beat him for not being a man and standing up for himself. There were plenty of other examples of abuse, but he thinks back to that moment often. And now that he has actual power, he knows that he doesn't have to take beatings from his bullies or his father or anyone else for that matter. Otto is dead, and the new person he's become has power. Unfortunately, what he doesn't realize is that he's become just like his bullies. Despite his brutality, Otto still has a conscience. For instance, within the Avenging Spider-Man comics, there's an entire story arc that has him collecting members of the Sinister Six to put them under his control and use them to help him with his hero adventures. This just seems to be downright evil since he's exploiting these villains and forcing them to do things against their will, but he does it out of a sense of responsibility. He genuinely feels bad for the terror that the Sinister Six had instilled upon the world, and he led them, he formed them. Every bad deed that this group did was on him. So he felt like he absolutely needed to do something about it, even if that certain something was inhumane. Another example ties back to all the beatings he had as a child. At one point when he's fighting the Vulture's henchmen, he's about to get the mask off of one of them and finds out that the entire time he's been fighting children. He immediately blames Vulture for essentially making him strike a child the same way his father would do to him, and puts Vulture in critical condition while completely blinding him. He was just a step away from killing him over the fact that he was using children, and Peter's conscience was not able to stop him in time. But some of his conflicting thoughts aren't so brutal. Some are kind of wholesome, like the time when he saved some people from a bomb. As he was disarming them, he wondered if what he was even doing was worth anything. At one point in his life, he tried to commit mass genocide, but now he was trying to save a handful of people. This could barely be considered any type of redemption, until one woman, one grateful mother, comes up to him crying and sobbing and can't thank him enough for allowing her to see her son again. And that small moment makes him realize that what he's doing now actually matters. The next time he crosses the line is when he has to deal with a villain named Massacre. Now if you don't know who Massacre is, then let me give you some backstory. So Massacre was in a car crash that killed his wife and damaged the part of his brain that allows him to feel emotions. And let me tell you, Massacre is actually Spider-Man's most terrifying villain, because he's so real, he lacks all sympathy, he's a complete sociopath. He doesn't take pleasure in it, but he still does just go out and commit a bunch of mass murders. And it's just simply because he doesn't care. He can be reasoned with, but if things go south for him, then everyone's dead, no questions asked. Unless of course he's offered money, because he is a businessman. But I digress. At one point he's committing a mass shooting that Spider-Man wants to stop by giving him a good sneak attack while he's distracted, with murdering dozens of people. But Peter forces him to jump and save a kid from a bullet because of course no one dies on his watch. But since Otto doesn't know that Peter is controlling his instincts, he chalks the save up to him just making a stupid mistake by giving up his tactical advantage. And it's a mistake he doesn't give up again. When Massacre shoots at him, Spider-Man dodges, allowing all the civilians behind him to get shot and killed, and because he doesn't really care about the casualties, he takes down Massacre rather quickly. Once Massacre is on the ground, Spider-Man gets a gun in his hand and asks for just one reason for why he shouldn't kill him right then and there. But instead of giving an actual answer, Massacre just cries. Massacre is terrified at the fact that Spider-Man might actually kill him. But he's not crying just because he's scared, he's crying because he's actually feeling something. He's feeling fear and happiness, it's all coming back to him. The only reason he kills is because he lacks sympathy, and if that sympathy is returning now, then that means he can be changed, he can be reformed, he can be... Spider-Man just didn't care. He shot him right in the head, thinking that this man was just irredeemable. When Peter Parker let him go last time, Massacre broke out of prison, killing one of his friends, and went on a killing spree afterwards. In Otto's eyes, he already had his chance, and even that one chance was too good for him. So he was doing something that Peter Parker was too weak to do. He was actually stopping the bad guy, and everyone loved him for it. The police don't even mind taking orders from him after the whole entire situation. It felt good now crossing that line, but it brought up another moral dilemma. Was his actions truly justified, or were they heinous? Alright, wait, hold on though. I just need to interrupt that entire segment to do like a word for my sponsors. And my sponsor is me, because I got something I want to show you guys. Bam. You don't know what this is. Let me tell you its importance. So this is a book that I've been writing called Spiritcaster Winter's War. Spiritcaster is like the entire series that I'm making. I'm making a 3-part series, or maybe more, but at the moment it's just supposed to be a trilogy. And it's a YA fantasy novel that has a bunch of magic in it, and it follows a girl named Crystal on an adventure to get revenge on an evil princess who basically massacred some of her family members. And she has to go on this entire adventure to find other magical beings to help her fight in a war against the royal family. It's a pretty neat one. This is my debut novel. And I don't know, I think it'd be really cool if you guys, pre-ordered it on Amazon, because, it's on Amazon to pre-order right now, and it comes out on January 6th, 2024. So, you guys can go and check it out or something. Might be pretty neat. Alright, back to the video. Spider-Man's actions are pretty controversial at this point, and it brings the attention of the Avengers. And they straight up think that what he did is completely wrong, and they debate kicking him off the team entirely. The only one on his side is Wolverine, because of course, his superpower is literally knives, so yeah, he's killed people. He'd be a hypocrite to have Spider-Man leave for doing the same. Also, every other member of the Avengers has killed at least once, so they try to let it slide just to see how things pan out in the long run. And within that time, Spider-Man traps 2 guys who made fun of his girlfriend in the back of a car and completely told it while they were inside, right before utterly beating the ever-living shit out of 2 internet pranksters. They broke his goggles, so he broke every bone in their body. Good trade-off. And after that, the Avengers decide that maybe he's taking things a tad too far. They do some tests on him to see if he's some shape-shifting scroll or if he's being mind-controlled, but they can't really find anything different about him. And Iron Man isn't there to look over things because he's off in outer space with the Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, at this time, so there's no one there who's smart enough to figure out that his brain's been swapped by Dr. Octopus. So they kinda just let him off the hook, allowing him to continuously keep crossing the line when it comes to serving his extreme justice. But he does get some moments to shine, like the time when he finds a girl who's dying because of a stunt he pulled when he was Dr. Octopus. He kind of just heated up the entire Earth for a few seconds, burning everyone to show the effects of global warming, and even though it was for a short period of time, the people of Earth who were already sick and compromised kind of just got worse from it and never fully recovered. So he goes in and does brain surgery on this kid, saving their life, and they show their gratitude by giving them their favorite stuffed animal. But it's okay because they give her a new Spider-Man stuffed animal that she admires even more. And never in his life had he ever been given a gift before, or even been admired by anyone, and it makes him want to change for the better. He wants to right all the wrongs from his previous life. But there's something that gets in the way of that. One thing that's threatening his entire new life as Peter Parker, and that would be, well, Peter Parker. Because that's right, Otto finally figures it out. That voice in the back of his head, the thing that forces him to take the harder path, and the one thing that's holding him back, it's Peter Parker. He's still alive somewhere in the back of his brain, and he's going to snuff him out. So he goes into his own mind and they have a mental battle. It's pretty cool because it's a battle of willpower, and they use the people who have been by their side throughout the years while also using the powers of who they truly are on the inside, Spider-Man. The battle ends with them trying to figure out who's truly superior, who truly deserves the power. Peter says that because of Otto, no one trusts him anymore, and that he's gone too far beating some of the villains to death. But Dr. Octopus counters this point by saying if Peter would have done it before, then things would have been better. Vulture wouldn't have forced children to work for him, Massacre wouldn't have killed 30 people, including one of Peter's closest friends. Oh, and remember that one little girl that Otto had to operate on? Well, Peter tried to stop him from doing so because he didn't want him to get the machine that would help him find the real Peter in his brain. It was a selfish act that wasn't worthy for Spider-Man, and they both knew that. Otto confirms that even though Peter was the one who was bitten, Otto was the one who deserved it more because he's accomplishing way more with that power. It puts doubt into Peter's mind, and he forces the machine to wipe every one of his memories. And then we have this horrifying, depressing sequence where Peter can't even remember his own name while fighting away from existence. Once he erases Peter from his mind, there's nothing stopping him from borderline killing every villain or criminal in his path because he thinks they were redeemable, even though he literally tried to commit mass genocide. But regardless, this makes every villain, thug, and gang absolutely terrified of going out and doing anything. But one man decides to use this to his advantage, and that man is the Green Goblin. He returns and decides to collect every thug in the city and use them in his army while calling himself the Goblin King. And in return, he gives them protection from Spider-Man, essentially finding a way to bypass the camera from his spider bots. He hasn't noticed any of this though because he's only taking W's in life. After blackmailing Mayor Jameson, he got access to the raft and turned it into his new base of operations, calling it Spider Island 2. He gets an entire army at his command, a bunch of mechs, and a new suit with some added insta-kill arms. What's that? My attire change? No, I'm not going to address that. It's not too long after he acquires all this power where I actually started to hate this character on a genuine personal level. For an actual super genius, he seems rather dense because he's always running in and fighting and shooting first and ask questions later when it comes to any situation. I mean, like, a lot of his problems would be solved if he just talked to the people that he's trying to borderline kill. There's even a point in the story where he actually meets Spider-Man 2099, Miguel O'Hara, and it's very obvious that they have a history and he means no harm, but the first thing that Dr. Octavius wants to do is just beat the living shit out of him. Without asking any questions, he's kind of just like, oh, you're just another guy in a Spider-Man costume. I'm gonna beat the shit out of you. Even though it's so obvious that that's not what should be happening, and that if he just talk things out, it's out because they know each other's identity. Miguel O'Hara even says stuff referring to the fact that they know each other, so he should know that he knows this person, and it wouldn't be wise to just attack them. But he wants to make enemies out of everyone he sees, and it's rather annoying. Oh my gosh, and don't even get me started on when he meets Black Cat for the first time. It's just pure abuse at that point. His asshole nature got old really quickly, like halfway through the story, but I think that's like pretty intentional because I'm pretty sure that the entire point was for us to miss the old Peter Parker and for us to want him back. His rampage gets even worse when he gets a hold of the Venom symbiote. With it, he gets even more dangerous than before. He smashed a purse snatcher's face through concrete and threatened to kill a man who was texting while driving just to prove that he had better control over the symbiote than anyone else before him. Hilariously enough, for completely unrelated reasons, Mary Jane pulls Peter aside to ask him why he's been acting so strange for several months, and he essentially responds by donning the black suit and threatening her by saying not to cross him or there will be consequences. And she sees this as a complete red flag and immediately calls the Avengers to take this menace down. And the fight's actually pretty cool. His strength is pretty relative to Thor, and it's hard for the Avengers to actually take him down, and the only reason he doesn't have the upper hand in the battle is because he's fighting alone. So he decides to call his entire spider army, and that just turns into an entire crazy war in New York. Meanwhile, the people of New York kind of see that Spider-Man's beating the crap out of the Avengers, and that coupled with the fact that he beats people up for jaywalking and has Spider-Bot cameras all over the city spying on everyone, makes all citizens hate him and rebel against him by breaking all of his Spider-Bots right then and there. Eventually the battle ends and they get the suit off of him, and once he's back to normal, he uses it as a perfect excuse for why he's been acting like a complete asshole for so many months. And no one fully disagrees with it, but they all call BS and think that he's probably lying to them. So since they're so suspicious, he decides to just quit the Avengers. You think that would solve all of his problems, but now at this point in the story, things literally take the most horrible turn for Doc Ock. First of all, New York goes to shit when almost all villains go on a rampage due to Goblin's orders, and since he no longer has his spider bots, he can't even see how bad it all is, so everyone thinks that he's working with the Goblin King because he's not doing much to stop any of his army. Then he personally goes to meet with Green Goblin and finds out that Norman knows his secret, that he's actually Dr. Octopus and he's stolen Spider-Man's body. He wants Otto to work under him, but he's too prideful for that, so in retaliation, Green Goblin just destroys Spider Island and his entire spider army. Then he goes and destroys every other location that ever meant anything to Otto, and he does that right before capturing his girlfriend, Anna Marie. After this, he essentially realizes that he's failed as Spider-Man and goes back to his lab to put Peter back in control. He tells Peter that he's a superior hero and that everyone needs him, not Otto. He hooks himself up to his machine to erase his part of his brain from Spider-Man's body. He erases his past as a villain, his presence as a hero, and the potential love he had with Anna Marie. And with that, Peter's finally back in control. He goes back to Goblin and gives him the most satisfying beatdown before saving the day and riding off into the sunset. Well, he would be riding off into the sunset if Otto didn't completely destroy his reputation, but that's a whole different story within itself. And that's basically the end of Superior Spider-Man for a while, until of course we get to, the Spider-Verse. Now for the first half of this series, I really liked this character. I thought he was really cool, but then in the later half of the series,
he just got more and more annoying, and I started to hate him a lot because of the simple fact that he doesn't develop in the right way that I would have liked. I mean, like, that could just be my opinion, because he does develop as a character, obviously, but he does it in the most insufferable way possible. This is the complete opposite of what happens in the Avenging Spider-Man and Superior Spider-Man team-up comics. And if you don't know what those are basically like these side stories where Spider-Man has to like team up with another superhero for like a comic or two, and like they work pretty well because like he learns a lesson in like every single side story. Every single book, he always learns some type of lesson. Like there's this one story where he meets Thor and they have to go on an adventure to try to stop Electro from like blowing up New York or something, I forget. But still, Thor in the end essentially almost sacrifices his life in order to fight off Electro. And Dr. Octavius in Spider-Man's body is just sitting there like, that's outrageously heroic. And he doesn't know if he could ever do that. And he wonders if the time ever comes, if he'll actually be able to lay down his own life to save the city or the world. And it's something that he actually wants to climb towards. There's another issue where he essentially goes on the shield There's another issue where he essentially goes onto the shield helicarrier and he compromises the entire security system at the same exact time where these other villains also basically go on board and start killing a bunch of innocent people for their own nefarious reasons. And there's a moment where Superior Spider-Man actually believes that he fucked up, and he thinks he messed, like it's all his fault for this happening. And it is his fault because he compromises the security systems, and if he didn't do that, the villains would not have been able to get on board as easily. But of course, his whole entire shtick is like not taking accountability, so by the end of the comic, he's just like, it's not my fault, it's theirs. I didn't end up helping them kill a bunch of people, so it is what it is. Yeah. And my favorite showing of this character is actually from issue 3 and 4 of Superior Spider-Man Team Up, which is a huge crossover event that was a part of Infinity. It's not so much what happens, but how Otto responds to everything. He becomes super analytical and thinks before engaging in all of the combat situations. And in this comic, someone ends up getting inhuman powers and starts wreaking havoc around town by complete accident. And when Spider-Man finds her, he immediately understands that this monster isn't actually evil and doesn't mean anyone any harm. He even tries to mentor her on how to use her powers. And if this would have happened in the main comics, then he would have probably said something like, "Oh, you oafish evildoer, prepare to take my wrath. You will regret crossing the great Superior Spider-Man. Now perish!" And I wouldn't have even blamed him because there was already an alien invasion going on at the time. But in this comic, he's still condescending, but actually still manages to be pretty nice and understanding. And the crazy thing is later, she actually does go a little crazy and tries to put humanity in the Dark Ages, but he still tries to reason with her, knowing that she's redeemable. There's also a scene where she turns off all the power in Manhattan, and Spider-Man only has a limited amount of time before she goes and gets enough power to get rid of all of electricity around the world permanently, but he instead uses that time to turn on some backup generators in a hospital to temporarily save the lives of some patients while knowing it's a terrible idea, and at the detriment of the entire world. And I absolutely love this side of him. He doesn't like doing the noble thing, but he still does it regardless. This is the way he should have been written in the main series in my honest opinion, but I think this specific comic was written by Robert Rohde instead of Dan Slott, who was in charge of the main series, which is no shade to Dan because I love his storytelling, but I like this interpretation of Superior Spider-Man a bit better. And it's not just Robert. In a comic that Christopher Yost wrote, he actually had Otto feel so guilty that he decided to just up and tell the Avengers that he wasn't really Spider-Man, but because of reasons it didn't really pan out all that way. So I guess all in all, when it comes to the combined efforts of all the writers who basically create all the Spider-Man team-up comics, I wasn't the biggest fan of the story, but I love the character development for Superior Spider-Man. And when it comes to the main comic, like the main Superior Spider-Man comic, it's actually vice versa, where I hated the character development, but I loved every part of the story. So to recap, this is a Spider-Man who is a complete prick to everyone around him. He doesn't hold back anything whenever he fights anyone. This is a man who took control of his old allies just so he could handle the responsibility and the burden that they cause upon the world. He works harder than the old Spider-Man, and he knows how to be there for the people he cares about and has a better work-life balance, or I guess superhero work-life balance. He becomes a doctor, he starts his own business, he gets this nice girl. His tech and all of his strategies are usually better than what Peter has ever done. So to answer the original question I posed in the beginning of the video, on whether or not he's good or evil, then the answer is, well, it's complicated. I know that sounds like a complete cop-out, but that's really how I define most characters, just complicated. Totally eluded me to turn that light on. I want to take a second to reference my Spider-Man 2099 video, because a lot of people weren't exactly fans of the way I titled it, which I mean, I don't blame them. Essentially, I basically say something along the lines of that Spider-Man 2099 is basically the best villain ever, like better than Thanos. Later in the video, I do explain that I don't think he's an actual villain, but some people didn't see that far and they totally disagreed and wanted to correct me in the comments. But some people actually did say something that is worth a discussion. Some people said that my video was completely flawed because of the fact that I'm comparing Miguel O'Hara, who is essentially a hero, to actual villains like Thanos when their character motivations are completely different. So, of course, he would be better because he's not technically an actual villain. But the thing is, they really aren't that different. Okay, so maybe comparing him to fucking Carnage is a little insane. I do get that, but that was more of like a bit. Carnage and other villains like him are not the main focus of that video. Who I was really comparing him to was the MCU version of Thanos, not the comic book version of Thanos. Comic book Thanos is definitely a complete menace, but the MCU version of Thanos is just a man who tried to save his planet. That's it. He's a man who tried to save his planet, he failed, and now he's just forcing his will onto the rest of the universe. Miguel O'Hara is exactly the same. He's a guy who fucked up, destroyed a universe, and now he wants to force his will by basically saving the rest of the multiverse while condemning a few other universes. They're both doing incredibly terrible things, but for what they think are amazing reasons, and debatably could be pretty damn good reasons. If you ask Miguel if you thought that he was a villain, he would probably tell you no, that he's a hero. And if you ask Thanos the same exact question, then Thanos would basically give an answer that's basically the same, just maybe a little bit more dramatic, like, oh, I'm a hero that I'm the only hero who has the strength to do what has to be done. You know, he'll give a dramatic and more cooler answer than that, but you know, they're both definitely gonna say that they're heroes. And if you ask the same exact question to Superior Spider-Man, he'd probably give you a much different answer that would be way more complicated. And if you ask Superior Spider-Man, he'd probably give you a much deeper answer, because he himself does not know the actual answer to that question. He stole Peter Parker's body for his own gain, and yet he still only used it for good because he promised that he would use it for good. And as he went out to save lives, he still wondered if he was even redeemable. He dedicated his entire life to evil. He wanted to prove a point that he was superior, but only just failed and just showed everyone that he was inferior. He was just a selfish man with a big ego who failed to make a point. His intentions were never good, they were all just to make a point. So I guess that means he's evil. Wait, but he's also saved the world, so that means that he's a hero. Even though at one point he tried to destroy everyone on Earth. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that I'm just running in circles. It's why I said at the beginning of the video that putting a binary morality system on a person is archaic. There's no such things as heroes and villains, obviously in reality, but even in fiction. There are plenty of tales of mythical heroes who basically fought for good. Heroes that we're supposed to be rooting for, but as time went on, they just became more problematic and weird in ways that the author never even really fully intended them to be. I'm always going to use these terms pretty loosely because, in my eyes, they've just lost all meaning. Especially for an egotistical yet insecure man like Otto, who just wanted another chance at life. But if you're unsatisfied with that answer, then all you need to know is that he's not evil, nor is he good. He's simply just a dick. And that's it. That's the whole video. If you liked it, then, you know, like and comment. You know, it took a bit, because I don't have the motivation to make videos like that sometimes. And it'd be really nice to have some extra motivation if I saw that you guys all liked it and commented, and I eventually make money off of it. Also, pre-order my book, Spiritcaster, Winter's War. on Amazon. And yeah.